think about this. Our God was sad. It made him sad, and it made him regret
that the earth was filled with Hamas.
That he made man because it was filled with Hamas. That's how strongly Yehovah feels about Hamas.
There are adult themes in this episode, and it may not be appropriate for all for children or for all audiences.
If you are not comfortable talking about the actual happenings of October the 7th, it's those types of things that we're going to talk about, because when we do a teaching on Hamas, we do a teaching on what the Bible says the word means. And those things that happened on October the 7th to women, we're very explicit about what happened. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about what happened to the young women. We're going to talk about what the Bible says. The Bible uses a lot of euphemisms for say it.
Euphemisms.
The Bible uses a lot of euphemisms to. For this, we're going to talk very directly about it, and we're going to talk about the meaning of Hamas, what it means, and that's part of it, guys.
And Hamas is not a euphemism; it's a very explicit term. So, if you're not comfortable with that, consider this a warning, and you might want to skip this episode.
Yeah, definitely. If you have a lot of trauma in the past, and you're not able to handle talking about that. We'll give you a really quick Cliff Notes version. Hamas means violence, lies, do ethically wrong, violate the Torah.
A word that we're not going to say because it might trigger you.
Yes. Things done to women. Pillage, plunder, humiliate, kidnap.
There you go.
So there's your quick...
That's the TLDR, too long didn't read.
Yeah, so you can look at that if you want to know what Hamas means.
There's a lot more to it than that, but yeah.
Yeah. Yehovah, we pray for the peace of Israel. Yehovah, we pray for those captives, those who are still captive from October the 7th. Father, I pray that you would release them. God, that you would be with them. Yeah, I don't know what else to pray, Nehemia, about that. Will you please pray?
Father, set the captives free when they call out Hamas. Be there to save them, Father. Let them be set free. The psalm says, like a bird in a snare. Let them be free and set them free from that captivity. Amen.
Amen.
Shalom and welcome to the Hamas Prophecy. We are going to talk about Hamas in the Tanakh, and very obviously this was a teaching that we were inspired to do after escaping from Israel after the October 7th Hamas attack. We were both in Israel when the attack started.
We wanted to know what the Bible said. What does the Bible say about Hamas? Does the Bible even mention Hamas? And it does. And so we did a Palestine prophecy, and now we're doing a Hamas prophecy.
And here we have, I think we should mention Amos 3:7. For Lord Yehovah does not do a matter without revealing his counsel to his servants, the prophets. And so I would expect to find something in the prophets about this, even if it's not the specific event on October 7th, but that pattern, that type of event must be somewhere in the prophets. So we started looking at Hamas. You asked me, what does Hamas mean? And we want to share a bunch of verses. And I actually had revelation from this. I learned something about a Hebrew word that I didn't know. And as far as I could tell, I don't know if anybody else knows either. So I'm a bit surprised. No, I think we did find one of the translations had that, but it's not commonly known. So let's start with Psalm chapter 11, verse 5. Do you want to read the JPS there? Psalm 11:5.
Sure. Yehovah seeks out the righteous man, but loathes the wicked one who loves injustice.
So that's the new JPS, the 1985 JPS. King James has, the Lord trieth the righteous, but the wicked in him that loveth violence, his soul hateth. So the JPS had injustice, and the King James had violence, and they're both right, because both of them have in Hebrew the word Hamas. Now, it's the Hebrew word Hamas, not the Arabic word Hamas. Just want to be clear. We'll talk about the Arabic. The group that attacked Israel on October 7th, known as Hamas, was established in the late 1980s, and it's an acronym for the Islamic resistance movement in Arabic, which I'm sure I'm mispronouncing, Haraka al-Mukawama al-Islamiyya, so, which is Hamas. So is there any connection between the Hebrew Hamas and the Arabic word Hamas? That's the question. And let's start out with Hebrew is a Semitic language, but more importantly in this case, the people who established Hamas in the 1980s, they grew up under Israeli rule. And here we have to distinguish it from the PLO, or Fatah, which was established in the 1960s. And it was established by people who had never stepped foot in the state of Israel, who didn't know Hebrew, who knew nothing about Jews, other than anti-Semitic tropes that they were trained on. So the PLO really had almost no connection whatsoever to Jewish culture. Hamas knew about Jewish culture. And when they called their organization the Hebrew word for violence, because that's what Hamas is in Hebrew, violence.
You said to me when we first started talking, because we've studied this for a long time, but there was a Sanskrit word as well.
Yeah, we've been studying this for months and finally decided, okay, we'll may never finish. We got to share it. So let's get the Sanskrit word is ahimsa, and the A there means non, and himsa, violence. And there's an example of what we'll talk about a little bit later, which is a false cognate. It's a complete coincidence that the Sanskrit word himsa, violence, and the Hebrew word Hamas, I think it's a complete coincidence. There's no organic connection there between the two words. Now, Hebrew and Arabic, it's different. They're Semitic languages, and the people who decided this is the acronym we're going to give the organization, because they could have called it Hama, right? It's Haraka al-Mukawama al-Islamiyya, and Islamiyya, the word Islam, right? It's the third word. So it could have been called Hama. Why did they call it Hamas instead of Hama'a? Probably because their goal was terror, and they knew that the word violence would strike terror in the heart of Israelis. Every Israeli knows what Hamas means. Anybody who's ever studied the Bible knows in biblical Hebrew, Hamas is violence. It also has the meaning of injustice, though, but the more common meaning is violence.
So this event that happened on October 7th, it used to it was an event of biblical proportions. It used to happen on a much broader scale, you said, but we were able to do something different this time.
Right, so it used to happen all the time. These were called pogroms, and they were race riots against the Jews wherever they lived, whether they were ruled by Romans, whether they were ruled by Catholics, Christians, Greek Orthodox, Muslims. This is something that happened. Even Zoroastrians did this against Jews, and it's actually kind of a question, why did they do this against Jews? And to me, that's prophetic. That's Deuteronomy 28, where you have
We've been asked that.
Yeah, well, it's Deuteronomy 28 where you have the blessings and the curse, and this is the curse. And you don't obey God, bad things happen to you. Now, does that mean the people who were harmed on October 7th were bad? No, this is a collective thing about Israel. It's not individuals that sinned and they got punished. That's not what we're saying at all, God forbid.
No.
There were completely innocent people who were killed. There were babies who were literally there was a baby cut out of its mother's womb while she was alive. So that baby didn't do anything. That was an innocent baby. So I want to make that clear. But yes, it has biblical significance, anything like this.
So just don't want to reiterate that word because I'd never heard it before, but since then you hear it all the time.
Which word?
Pogrom.
Oh, pogrom.
I'd never heard that word, and I thought, what does that mean?
A pogrom is a race riot against Jews.
There you go. But the difference between today and
so
back in
right. So let's say,
Hitler's
for example, or even before Hitler, you had the Khmelnytsky massacres in 1648, where something like 1/3 of the Jews of Europe were wiped out. So imagine October 7th, but it doesn't stop after 3 days. It goes on month after month after month until 1 in 3 Jews are dead, and then the survivors. Can I be really honest here? So I have blonde hair and blue eyes, and that's I don't know why that is, but it could be probably a bunch of my ancestors were raped, and they survived, and the Jews in the Middle Ages developed this idea, which is contrary to the Bible. The Torah talks about, or the Tanakh talks about, all inheritance is through the father, and
It's Ginger. Just saying.
okay, ginger and blue eyes. All right, and you want to call them bluish green, whatever. That's not the point, right? The point is that you of Cherokee extraction
Yes.
are actually darker than me, whose ancestors came from the Middle East.
True.
And the reason for that is that, and she's more Cherokee than that lady in the Congress, but we're not saying she's a pure Cherokee. No, right? Like you have like one Cherokee ancestor out of 64
Somewhere.
or something.
Somewhere.
Yeah, whatever. So in any event, I'm like, wow, what a nice tan you got. She's like, no, this is just what I look like. All right. So the point is that the Jews developed this idea in the Middle Ages. The Torah says inheritance and tribal affiliations according to the father. They developed this idea that it's according to the mother because they often didn't know who the father was, frankly, because these pogroms were so common and they involved murder, theft, kidnapping, and rape. And that was the standard. So what happened on October 7th, Jews all over the world said, this is Kishinev. This isn't supposed to happen in Israel. Kishinev was the one in 1904 that was famous. Fewer Jews died in Kishinev. It was a town in what today is Moldova, I think. I think it's the capital of Moldova, which is next to Romania. It was part of the Russian Empire in 1904. And they just started massacring the Jews. And by the way, it was around the time of Passover. These massacres in the Christian world often happened around the time of Easter, which coincides with Passover. And what would happen is they were in their churches and they would hear these sermons, the Jews crucified our Lord. And people would get whipped up into a frenzy of hatred. They'd hear terms like Antichrist. They'd hear terms like Christ killer, killers of God. The Jews did it. And then they would get whipped up into a frenzy and come out of their churches and attack the Jews. And this is just what happened. And in the Kishinev massacre, fewer people were killed. But then it became famous because there was a lot of news coverage about it. And it was in modern times. But there were massacres throughout 1904 and 1905 where thousands and thousands of Jews were killed. And not only did no one come to save us, the people who were committing the massacres were being egged on by the secret police of the Tsar, which is the forerunner of the, whatever it's called today, later became the KGB, or the same kind of idea of the KGB. It was the Tsar's secret police, the same people who fabricated this protocols of the Elders of Zion. Mm-hmm. It's a forgery that was made by the Tsar's secret police. And they weren't that, we know they existed, so when we say secret police, we mean they were in plain clothes. And right, it's not a conspiracy that they existed, but they were a secret police, that is.
So
so this happened all the time in Jewish history. Okay. The difference was on October 7th, we had an army that came to fight back, and the army then went into Gaza to root out the enemy to make sure that they don't do this again. And are they never going to do it again? They probably will try, but we're going to do the best we can to limit their capabilities to do this because they've promised to do it again. There was the speech or the interview of the one Hamas guy who says, October 7th, we're going to do 8th, 9th, 10th, and a millionth. We're going to keep doing it. And the other Hamas leader said this is a rehearsal for what we plan on doing throughout the whole country. So this is biblical. And it says here, Yehovah hates. Say hates.
Hates.
It actually doesn't say hate. It says his soul hates.
His soul.
The soul of Yehovah hates the evildoer. Yehovah is a soul. The soul of Yehovah hates the evildoer and lover of Hamas. Is that what Christians call the Holy Spirit, Yehovah's soul? No, I don't know. That's theology. Let's stay out of it.
I don't know spirit versus soul, so I'm not a theologian either.
Right.
Let me ask you this. When they named it Hamas,
yeah.
Do you think that they knew that in Hebrew what it meant?
That it meant violence?
Yeah.
They definitely knew that.
Do you think that was a part of
These were people who had been in Israeli
tactic?
prisons? Absolutely. It was a tactic to terrorize Jews. We have an organization that to us means freedom, but we know to you it means violence, and we're coming to kill you all, which is in their charter, which we'll get to later. But let's save that.
Okay.
What I want to do is look at So the different meanings of Hamas in the Tanakh.
Okay.
And the significance of Hamas. So one is God's soul hates Hamas. The next one is actually the first time Hamas appears in the Tanakh. And we're told Hamas was the reason for the flood. Hamas is the reason that God decided to wipe out humanity except for one family that he preserved, because the world was full of Hamas.
Let's read that.
So it's Genesis 6, 11 through 13. And 11 and 13 are really interesting because they're in what we call a chiastic structure. A chiastic structure is a sort of poetic structure where you say, you have a phrase, and then a second phrase, and then the next sentence, or a later sentence, you switch them, and then the second phrase comes first, and the first
Give me an example.
So my favorite one is when God gives this commandment, which, boy, it applies to Hamas. It says, Shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam damo yishafech. So there you hear some alliteration, even if you don't know Hebrew. Shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam damo yishafech. So first of all, hear the alliteration there. It's dam, 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 damo, right? So it's dam, literally 4 dams, and it begins with shofech and ends with yishafech, right? So it's ABC, CBA.
Okay.
Right, that's a very sophisticated type of chiastic structure. And in a sense, it's not very sophisticated, it's very simple. The purpose there of the chiastic structure is what does it mean? Genesis 9. He who sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. Right, and blood and man sound similar, but it's he who sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. So it's ABC, CBA. And the purpose there is clear, it's so people memorize it. Right? Once you know that in Hebrew 2 or 3 times, if you know Hebrew, you'll memorize that. Here it's more a little bit different. Here it's maybe more poetic. So here it says, we're going to read verses 11 and 13. You can read verse 12 too if you want.
The earth became corrupt before God. The earth was filled with lawlessness. When God saw how corrupt the earth was, for all flesh had corrupted its ways on earth, God said to Noah, I've decided to put an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with, what's this word?
We'll just read what you have.
Lawlessness. Mm-hmm. Because of them, I'm about to destroy them with the earth.
Right, and the word there is Hamas. Right, the word lawless in both cases is Hamas, and in this context it means probably something like violence. But what it says here, I'm going to give you my translation, and you can hear a little bit better. I'll explain the ABBA. The chiastic structure. The earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with Hamas. And God said to Noah, I'm skipping verse 12. God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, because the earth is filled with Hamas because of them. And behold, I will destroy the earth. So the word for corrupt and the word for destroy has the same root, shachat. So you don't hear the chiastic structure in English, but you hear it in Hebrew. So it starts vatishachet and it ends mashchitam, right, or near the end. It has at the beginning of this 3-verse section shachat and the end shachat. And then the next element is the earth was filled with Hamas. And then he says, for the earth was filled with Hamas at the end of verse 11 and the first half of verse 13, right? That's ABBA. And here Hamas is, they translated lawlessness. Hamas is violence in this context. But it's not just violence, it's also corruption. And we can see that here, the earth was corrupt. The word shachet, vatishachet, it was corrupted. And so here, Hamas is a synonym for vatishachet, and the earth was corrupt. Because the earth was corrupt, essentially, and the earth was filled with Hamas. So Hebrew likes to say everything twice, right? It's like they felt like an ancient Hebrew speech if they weren't heard unless they said everything twice, sometimes more than twice. Here it's really, shachat is 4 times, in fact, if you look at verse 12.
So one of my favorite parts about this, Nehemia, because I'm thinking about, we're talking about God and God's soul. We go up to verse 5. I love that.
Read it.
It's important for us to understand what God was looking at. It says, Jehovah saw how great was man's wickedness on earth, and how every plan devised by his mind was nothing but evil all the time. And Jehovah regretted that he had made man on earth, and his heart was saddened. Jehovah said, I will blot out from the earth the men whom I created, men together with beasts, creeping things, birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them, but Noah found favor with Yehovah. So,
And we need to do a whole study on this word regret as applied to God.
Oh.
And do you know what the root is there?
no, I
The
don't.
same root as my name,
Nech-
Nechem.
Nechem.
It's the Nifal, which is Lihinachem, which can also be translated to be comforted. So how does it come to mean regret? That's a separate study. Let's not go down that rabbit trail.
Okay, but I'll put that on there. But here's the
yeah,
thing that I think
yeah.
is really important. When we talk about the study on Hamas,
Mm-hmm.
we talk about the fact that the flood happened because there was so much Hamas on
Right.
earth, and God,
And that was corruption.
his soul hated Hamas.
Right.
And the part that, I wrote this down because it's just, think about this. Our God was sad. It made him sad, and it made him regret
That the earth was filled with Hamas.
that he'd made man because it was filled with Hamas. That's how strongly Yehovah feels about Hamas. So,
But to summarize here, Hamas is parallel to ethical corruption, right, with the connotation of violence as well. So we're gonna do the next part of the study is what we're gonna do is what the dictionaries do.
okay.
So with the dictionary, if we looked in a dictionary, and we did look in a bunch of lexicons, what does the word Hamas mean? And they gave us several definitions. But so here I'm going to make a distinction between a dictionary that is prescriptive and descriptive.
Okay, what's the difference?
So a prescriptive dictionary is what we all grew up at school
Webster's?
looking in. Webster's.
Okay.
Right? The teacher would say, you use that word, look up, you used it wrong, look up and see what it means. And you'd look it up and it would tell you, these are the four sanctioned definitions. We're prescribing to you what it means.
And then they give you a sentence and pronunciation.
Right, and if it's not in that dictionary, it doesn't mean that.
Okay, that's
Okay.
prescriptive.
Now, in reality, we have a lot of words in our speech that don't mean in the dictionary what the dictionary says. Or let me rephrase that. We have a lot of words in our speech that mean in our speech, in our daily usage, they have meanings that aren't in the dictionary. And that's why they're updating the dictionary all the time. So when I was at Hebrew University at Mount Scopus, they had something called the Oxford English Dictionary, which was like 20 volumes. It filled up an entire, it was like the size of this couch, the lengthwise, or the volumes and lined up on the shelves. And it's a descriptive dictionary. It doesn't just tell you what the word means. It says, here's what it meant in the 1600s, and here's how we know. Here's an example of how it was used. And here's what it meant in the 1700s. How do we know? Because it was used in these three instances. And then sometimes there'll be usages that existed in the 1600s that aren't around today, and vice versa. So why is that important? What we need to do is, what I want to do is reverse engineer what the descriptive dictionary did. So when you look at a biblical Hebrew lexicon, the authors of the Bible didn't use those dictionaries because they didn't exist. What the authors of those dictionaries did is they looked at all the verses in the Bible and they said, okay, what are the four definitions of Hamas? And let's give examples of each one. And they may have missed some, right? Because they're doing every word in the Bible. We have the advantage here of where we spent several months on one word, right? So
we did.
So we probably put a lot more energy into the word Hamas than they did. And that's what people in my field will later do is they'll write an article and they'll say, a new meaning of this word has been discovered that nobody ever noticed. Happens all the time.
We wanted to see for ourselves.
Yeah.
Not what the dictionary said, but what it meant.
Well, and how do we know that? And how
what
is
the
it
Tanakh
used?
actually says
How is
about
it used in the Tanakh, right?
Yeah.
We're also going to do a second thing later where we're going to do something the dictionaries also do, which is comparative Semitic linguistics. So Hebrew is part of a family of languages. And the importance of the comparative Semitic linguistics is Hebrew was the Tanakh was written over 2,000 years ago, right? 2,500. The last book in the Tanakh, well, depending when you think it was written, around 2,500 years ago. And it was written over a period of 1,000 years. So it's, look, if I was to look up a word in English, I would say, what does this word mean in the English language in the 1600s? I'd look in the dictionary, and I'd look in the Oxford English Dictionary, and if I found a meaning that I didn't find in the Oxford English Dictionary, then I'd say, wait a minute, okay, what does this word mean? And that happens, by the way. English linguists actually encounter this, where they'll find a word, and they're like, okay, is this some dialect, a local dialect of a certain part of New York or something, of upstate New York? That's an actual example. Or maybe it's a certain dialect of a certain part of Scotland or something, because we don't...
Like here in North Carolina is our brogue that you and I
Right, well, that's pronunciation. So the question is, do they have words that we don't know from anywhere else in English?
okay.
I won't give an example, but because we're going to go down a rabbi trail there, or a rabbit trail. So, but the point is that not everything in the English language is in the dictionary, but here's the important thing. The body, or what we call the corpus of English literature, is over 1 billion words. The corpus of the Hebrew Bible is much less than that. The Hebrew Bible is about 1,000 pages, and then you maybe have some inscriptions, right? And the inscriptions are mostly, there were 3 ephahs of flour that were sent to the Kittim, right? Okay, and it's more and more of that in the 3rd year, right? And there was 5 ephahs of flour and 3 of wine or whatever, right? Right. So so we have a lot of Hebrew inscriptions, but we don't have a lot of words from those inscriptions, right? Meaning it's the same word over and over because they're mostly like administrative lists. And then we have inscriptions like, for example, the Siloam inscription or the Shiloach inscription in Jerusalem, where we know every single word in that inscription except one. And there's one word that's unique in the entire history of the Hebrew language that has survived. Now, that might have been a common word that people used every day, but the Bible in the 1,000 pages just never mentioned that word.
Didn't you have a story about that, like with a broom or somebody that was?
No, that was where they forgot the meaning of a word in Isaiah.
Oh, they forgot it.
So,
Okay.
but it was a unique word in the Bible, right?
Yeah.
But it was a word that was So Isaiah says, "And they will sweep away, or I will sweep away Babylon with the broom of destruction." And the rabbis were discussing this verse, and they said, "What is this word broom?" They didn't know what it was, right? It's matateh. They had no idea what it was until they heard the maidservant they saw her hand a broom to her subordinate and say, "Take the broom and sweep the floor." And they said, "Oh, that means broom. It's that thing that we have in our houses." But in the Tanakh, it only appears, I think, in that one place. And it wasn't part of the learned dialect that the rabbis knew when they spoke Hebrew and studied Hebrew, but the maidservant knew it. And there it's like the brogue of North Carolina. You go to these fishing villages in the Outer Banks, and you have a few hundred people who speak a specific dialect that nobody else speaks, and they might have words that were used hundreds of years in English that nobody else uses anymore.
Right.
And that's what happened with the broom of destruction in Isaiah, that the rabbis learned the word from this maidservant. Why the maidservant? She probably came from some distant village where they still spoke Hebrew and used words that had been forgotten in the big cities.
Do we know how many times Hamas was used?
Ooh, we can look that up. I don't think I checked that.
I think that was
in our months of study.
I know. I was just thinking. I don't think I have that written down either.
So it appears 68 times in 67 verses.
Wow.
Yeah, and there might be other forms of it I'm not including. So, but that is the verb at least appears. Or no, it's a noun actually in that form. No, that's the noun and the verb. All right. So, what are the definitions of Hamas in the Hebrew, in the Tanakh? And this is an important principle. The Bible needs to interpret the Bible because what the word means today might not be what it means in biblical Hebrew. I was once giving a talk in southern Israel, actually in some of the areas that were attacked on October 7th. And I was giving a talk to a group about the Aviv while we were going out and looking at the Aviv. And there was this Israeli woman who was listening in on us. And I explained Aviv in biblical Hebrew refers to a state of the ripening of the barley. And she interjects, like Israelis will, into other people's conversations that have nothing to do with them. And she'll say, "That's not true. Aviv means spring." And I said, "Thank you so much for saying that, ma'am. I'm sure I didn't say that." That's what I would say today. I was probably rude. But why did she say that? Because in modern Hebrew, Aviv means spring. And from the 14th century, we can talk about, and here it's from a descriptive dictionary, right? Mm-hmm. Around the 14th century, if I remember correctly, the meaning of spring starts to appear in Hebrew literature. Before that, it didn't mean spring, right? It meant this stage in the ripening of the barley. So the point is words change over time, and we have to interpret the Tanakh based on the Hebrew of that day. And when we look at later Hebrew, we're treating it like another Semitic language, essentially.
Okay.
All right. So 3 definitions in the Tanakh with some sub-definitions. So number 1, it's violence, which includes rape, pillage, and kidnapping. And we'll look at some examples of that. It means ethical corruption, which can include humiliation, lying, and violating the Torah. And then the 3rd definition is one I didn't know about and isn't in any dictionary that we could find, as far as I remember, and that's to do something rigorously. And we'll get to that at the end. All right, let's start with violence. Nehemia says, let's start with violence. Hamas.
Let's start with the definition.
Let's start with rape and pillaging. Joel 4:19. Do you want to read that one?
Okay.
So here, one of the things we're looking for is how is the word used in the verse, and what is the parallel? Because remember, Hebrew likes to say everything twice.
Right.
And so if we can find these parallels, we can see what it means in that specific verse. And there might be some nuance we're missing, and we'll look at a bunch of verses to get the nuance, but we can see the general meaning in Joel 4:19.
Egypt shall be a desolation. Shall
Yep.
we start?
Yep.
And Edom a desolate waste, because of the outrage to the people of Judah, in whose land they shed the blood of the innocent.
So they translated Hamas as outrage in the JPS, which tells me absolutely nothing. Here, Hamas means violence. And how do I know it means violence? It's parallel to they spilled innocent blood.
Shed the blood of the innocent.
Shafchu dam naki, they spilled innocent blood. And so Hamas against the children of Judah, in that they spilled the innocent blood in their land, is what it says. And then another verse where we can see Hamas meaning violence. And look, you can't just look at one verse, because in one verse you might say, oh, okay, well, it kind of does mean just, they said outrage, right? Mm-hmm. Well, it certainly doesn't mean ethical corruption in Joel 4:19, right? Think about it. So that because of the ethical corruption against the children of Judah, because they spilled innocent blood. No, it's not just generic ethical. I mean, it's a violent act, right? It's something that results in blood being spilled. Mm-hmm. So Genesis 49:5, we can read 5 through 7. That is where Jacob is blessing his children, and he has a blessing for Shimon and Levi. And the background here is that Shimon and Levi, or Simeon and Levi, they, when Dinah, their sister, was raped, they tricked the men of Shechem to get circumcised, and they went and killed them all when they were weak from circumcision. Start in verse 5.
Genesis 49.
49, start in verse 5.
Simeon and Levi are a pair. Their weapons are tools of lawlessness. Let not my person be included in their council. Let not my being be counted in their assembly. For when angry, they slay men, and when pleased, they maim oxen.
And that's a play on words, because the name of the city is Shechem, which means the shoulder of an ox. And and then the son of who raped Dinah was called Hamor, which is a donkey, right? So we have like animal terminology here.
Cursed be their anger so fierce, and their wrath so relentless. I will divide them in Jacob, scatter them in Israel.
So this was a blessing, which in a sense was a curse. And what's the curse part? All the other tribes got a contiguous piece of land, meaning there was a territory that they got. Mm-hmm. The Levites didn't get a territory. They got individual cities, 42 or 48, depending on how you count them, cities scattered throughout Israel. And Simeon, they got little cities and regions within Judah. So both of those tribes didn't actually get contiguous land, meaning a continuous piece of land. So where's Hamas here? So I'll read you what it says in the Hebrew. Simeon and Levi are brothers. The tools of Hamas are their wares. For in their wrath they killed a man. I'm skipping part of it here. Mm-hmm. So meaning for in their wrath they killed a man is the explanation of the tools of Hamas are their wares. And here it means the tools of violence. So Hamas here means violence. And it definitely doesn't mean ethical corruption in the sense of non-violent ethical issues, right? You could say it's unethical to kill somebody, but it doesn't mean ethical corruption in the sense of robbery, lying, well, maybe robbery, lying, theft, right? That's kind of, there's a lot of, taking advantage of the poor, which is what Hamas sometimes means. Here it doesn't mean that, it means violence.
So verse 6 says, let not my person be included in their council. Mm-hmm. Who is this talking?
Actually it says, let not my soul enter their council. And council is where we get together and we discuss what we're going to do. So what do they mean? What does he mean by that? Let's see that for a separate study. Genesis 9:24.
Okay.
No, at this rate, this will be a 4-hour teaching.
No. Genesis 9:24?
Yes, my love.
All right. Genesis 9:24.
And so the background here is they asked Gideon if he wanted to be king, And he said, no, you'll have a king. God's your king. You don't need me. And then Avimelech, his good-for-nothing son, said, oh, I'll be king. And I better kill all my brothers or they might claim the throne. So he killed all of his brothers. He missed one. And another part of the background is Gideon's nickname is Jerubbaal, or Jerubbaal. So it's, do you want to read it?
I'm in Genesis 9.
Judges 9:24.
Thank you. No, I'm in
Did
the.
I say Genesis?
I don't know. Maybe you didn't.
I think Penny Penguin said Genesis.
Penny
I was saying
Penguin
Judges.
may have said that.
Smart.
She may have done it. So we're in Judges
Judges 9:24.
9:24. Okay, and I always,
Judges is going to be just after Joshua.
I know, I look at it
Which is
before,
just after Deuteronomy.
and it's like Joshua judges Ruth in the.
Right.
So
Then-
I'm in the other
but Joshua's
place.
just after Deuteronomy.
I know, but now I'm in.
So if you're in Kings, you're too far.
I know. I got it. But what I was saying is in the.
Yeah, in your Christian Bible.
Yeah, it's
And she's
different
reading here
place.
from the Jewish
So
Publication
now I'm
Society.
so old habits.
And you used to do a thing, right, when you were, tell them about the sword drills when you were a kid.
So I know the books of the Bible, but I know them much better in the NRSV or NIV.
Well, the Christian
In the
order is
Christian,
different.
yeah, the Christian order is different.
So tell them what a sword drill is.
A sword drill is where you put your hand on the top of the Bible and the bottom of the Bible. Everybody has the same Bible. It's always a King James Bible, didn't matter. And this is just as a child. It was a game we would play. They would bring the children in. You know how they bring children in and they'll sing or they'll do something in front of the church? Okay.
I have no idea.
So what we would do is before church began, there was like singing and there's all types of things before that. And one of the things we would do as children is we would have what's called sword drill.
Oh, yeah.
And it was the Bible. And the first person, you'd hold it like this and someone would say the scripture you had to find, and the first person to find it and read it won.
So they'd say like Judges 9:24.
Exactly.
And
And
the
you go,
first
Joshua
person-
judges Ruth. Oh, I know where that is.
And the first person to find it would win. And you were,
Right.
were you good at this?
I was very good at it, but now Deuteronomy's after Judges is not in the same place. So I'm just saying.
Well, no. Anyway.
Yeah, I was very good at it.
Okay.
I had to be. My dad was the pastor. You had to be good at it.
All right. All right. Judges 9:24. What does
And
it
I
say?
love the Bible. Judges 9:24 is on this page. Okay. To the end that the crime committed against.
Let's start with
23 maybe?
And God sent an evil spirit.
Then God sent a spirit of discord between.
Is that what it says in
It
the JPS?
says a spirit of
in the Hebrew,
discord.
it says ruach ra'ah, which is literally an evil spirit. God sent. Say God sent
God sent
an evil
an
spirit.
evil spirit
Wow. Between Avimelech. Oh, let me read your version.
between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem. And the citizens of Shechem broke faith with Abimelech to the end that the crime committed against the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might be avenged, and their blood recoil upon their brother Abimelech, who had slain them, and upon the citizens of Shechem. Is it Shem or
Shechem.
Shechem, who had abetted him in the slaying of his brothers.
So here's what it says. This is my translation, the correct one. And God sent an evil spirit between Avimelech and the rulers of Shechem, and the rulers of Shechem betrayed Avimelech to bring the Hamas of the 70 sons of Jerubbaal and to place their blood on Avimelech, their brother, who killed them. Right, that's why God sent the evil spirit, meaning. And on the rulers of Shechem, who strengthened his hands to kill his brothers. So God sent the evil spirit to cause, and it is correct, to cause discord, but that's not what it says. It says an evil spirit. And the reason for this is to bring the Hamas of the 70 sons of Gideon, of Jerubbaal, and to place their blood on Avimelech, their brother, who killed them. So what did he do? He killed them. So Hamas here is the violence of the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, or that was done against the 70 sons of Jerubbaal. So Hamas was committed against the 70 sons of Jerubbaal by spilling their blood. And so the evil spirit came to place their blood on Avimelech's head. That's the expression, the blood is on his head in the Bible. So Hamas here means violence. Now Hamas also isn't just generic violence. It can be spilling blood, we've seen. It can also be kidnap and rape. There are 1, 2, 3, I'll read them. I won't read the verses, I'll give people the verses to do some homework. Jeremiah 6:7, Jeremiah 20 verse 8, Ezekiel 45:9, Amos 3:10, Habakkuk 1:3, Habakkuk 2:17. 6 verses have Hamas as part of a phrase or parallel to the word shod. Shod means pillaging. Shod is you come in, you burn the houses, you steal stuff, you slaughter. That's pillaging.
A Shin Dalet?
Shin Daled, shod. So, and the phrase often there in these verses, sometimes it's two halves of a verse, but usually it's Hamas vashod. And that's what we call hen diadis. That's a fancy term that means two that are one. And it's when you say two things, either one modifies the other, or they're two of the exact same things, and so hence it modifies it by saying it twice, right? So Hamas vashod can mean showed in the manner of Hamas. That's what it can mean, right? Meaning violent showed, violent pillaging, or it can mean violence and pillaging because the form of violence that's being carried out is pillaging. All right.
Hamas shod.
Hamas vashod.
Vashod.
And sometimes it's shod vachamas, right? Shod and Hamas, or Hamas and shod. So they are two concepts that are a pair, right? So it's violence and pillaging. And we can see the kidnapping part of the pillaging in Habakkuk 1:9. So it says, do you want to read Habakkuk 1? Can you find Habakkuk? I know it's not easy.
I'll find Habakkuk. And we're going to read Habakkuk 1:9. It's going to be back here.
Well, no, so it's right before Psalms.
And then I can find it.
Oh, no,
easily.
you're in Micah, so it's somewhere around here.
Yeah.
It's just before Zephaniah, maybe? I can never find it within the 12. But right, there's what we call the 12 minor prophets. And
It's right this way. It's right before Zephaniah, right?
oh, there you go.
Yeah.
I believe so. Zephaniah. There it is, Habakkuk before Zephaniah. Okay, so Habakkuk 1:9.
They all come bent on rapine.
What's the word?
Rapine?
How do you spell that?
Rapine.
What does that mean?
You tell me.
So according to the prescriptive dictionary,
Okay.
rapine means the violent seizure of one's property. Okay.
The thrust of their van is forward.
Oh, and this is interesting. So the example the dictionary gives, this is from Oxford Languages, I guess, but I got it from Google, is the fruits of violence and rapine. So here's an example of the concept I said before, where you say two things that are the same, or they're overlapping, right? So the fruits of violence and rapine. So rapine is the violent seizure of property. So it's violence and rapine, but rapine is violent, but it's a specific type of violence, right? So these go together. They're very related concepts. And that's exactly like Hamas vashod, Hamas and pillaging, because Hamas is violence, which includes pillaging.
This is they amass captives like sand.
Right. So here's what I have. He comes entirely for Hamas, this enemy that's attacking. The direction of their faces are forward, and he gathers up captives like the sand.
Wow.
So here, this Hamas includes or involves kidnapping, right? They're kidnapping people. They're taking them captive, in this case, in an invasion, in a raid, right? I mean, it's exactly what happened, literally what happened on October 7th.
That's exactly what happened.
Not even similar, literally what happened on October 7th. It's the type of raid that would have happened in history centuries ago, happened in the year 2023. Jeremiah 13:22 is the next one we want to look at. And here we can see the connotation of Hamas involving rape. And actually, while you're looking for that, can you talk about, we have a graphic for this episode, which we really prayed about whether we were going to use this graphic. And it's a graphic from a video that was put out by Hamas, quite proud. They put it out because they were proud of it. They were bragging about what they did. And it has a woman named, a 19-year-old girl named Naama Levi. Can you talk about that?
So we did pray about it. We've talked a lot about it. She's still in captivity at this moment. One of the things that I want us to do together is to pray for the captives. I know that years from now, when you look at this teaching, they'll no longer be captive. But right now they're still captive, and we need to pray especially for Naaman Levi. Her last name,
She's a Levite.
She's a Levite. And it's one of the pictures that many women can't look at. It's taken months and months and months for me to look at it. I looked at it again last night, and these things are traumatic to. One of the things, Nehemia, that you mentioned in the Bible is that we have euphemisms, especially for what we're about to talk about. And the reason, why do we use euphemisms for these types of things? Why do they use euphemisms in the Bible, Nehemia?
Let's start with what's a euphemism.
Okay.
A euphemism is, and let's state the, for years from now, someone may not know who Naaman Levi is or what this image is, and they might be listening to it and not see the image. So can you tell them
okay, let me tell you what the image is of a young woman, 19 years old. The film shows her, this guy with a big armament, pulling her from the back of a Jeep where she's stuffed in a little area. There's blood. She's been beaten around her face.
What's she wearing?
She's wearing sweatpants and a shirt.
It's clear she was sleeping in her pajamas when she was kidnapped.
The pants the sweatpants, they push her, they take her from the back and they put her around and they push her into the middle of many men sitting in the back of this vehicle. And she has blood from the behind, you can see all the way at the top of her pants in the back, down through her legs. And it's obvious that she's been abused, not
Let's
just
not use a
beaten.
euphemism. What happened to her?
She was raped. Enough that there's blood spilled all over, everywhere. That's Hamas. And we'll read in the Bible where this has happened, and it's Hamas.
That's literally one of the meanings of Hamas in the Hebrew.
It is. And a euphemism is when we say something like someone had relations with someone.
Or you said she was abused. You just used the euphemism.
Yeah,
she wasn't abused. She was violently raped.
She was.
Probably by multiple people. And probably, can we say it?
I don't know what you're going there. I don't know.
You don't even want to say it.
I don't know where you're going with it, but she was, things that are so offensive that you can't hear them, that's when you use a euphemism.
Also in the Tanakh, things that are scary. So there's one euphemism, which is whenever the word afolim appears in the Tanakh, and it appears, I don't know the number, but a number of times, it's instead of that word, when they would read it out loud in the synagogue, they would instead read the word tchorim. Now, what is afolim? Afolim are the boils of the Black Plague. Why wouldn't they say that word? There was obviously a superstition that if you say that word, the plague might come to your town and you'd die. And so they said another word that also means the boils of the Black Plague, but it was a word that somehow wasn't frightening to them. So think about that. And the word that was frightening is written in the Bible, and even today when they read it in the synagogue, they read this other word, because there's this memory, this cultural memory that word is so frightening that you can't even say it. Like, think about that, thousands of years later. When we have antibiotics for the Black Plague, it's still frightening to people.
So after October the 7th, and I'm sure I wasn't the only woman to do this.
So we were in Israel, and you're in Jerusalem.
We were, and we were in Israel.
Happened.
And we knew what had happened. You know, we knew all this. We were following very closely what had happened. We saw the videos and the pictures that Hamas put out. I mean, it was impossible not to. They put them across the AP. Some of these violent photos
Some of the photographers
awards.
Some of the photographers were Hamas terrorists.
Right. That's exactly right. And so I would personally, Nehemia and I, we did a lot of filming during that time. We wanted people to know what was happening. And so when we would go out, normally I would wear a dress. Love to wear long dresses. It's very comfortable to me. But I would wear lots of clothes underneath. I would wear 2 layers of clothes, didn't matter how hot it was. And I would wear my combat boots in case I had to run, because there were infiltrations that would happen in your area and you didn't know if a terrorist was in the area. We lived, Nehemia has a place in Jerusalem. And there's a whole Arab area in Jerusalem, and I'm not being judgmental. All I'm saying is that there are things that have happened in that area and still do to this day right now, and probably will until Jehovah comes to establish.
So let's not use euphemisms. What were you doing and why?
I was dressing to make it very difficult if someone wanted to rape me. Yeah.
So you were wearing multiple layers,
Absolutely.
So they would take them longer and make it
more difficult.
Make it logistically more difficult.
Yeah. I mean, there's not a lot you can do,
wow.
guys. There's not a lot you can do. There was nothing those young women could do to protect themselves, except everything there was not a whole lot you could do. You run, you hide.
And that was the moment where I said, okay, I've got to get my wife out of here. She's not, we were planning on leaving anyway, but when I saw that, I'm like, okay, this is not a healthy situation.
I wasn't afraid of the bomb. I wasn't afraid of a bombing. I wasn't afraid of missiles overhead that were going off. Wasn't afraid of that, because Nehemia and I, if something happened like that, we're together. It's okay. I do want to lose my husband, but together it's okay. And I know you guys that are married and love each other will understand that, but I didn't want. That would be awful. I mean, it's awful for the woman, but it's also awful for a husband in that situation. So, yeah.
All right, Jeremiah 13:22. What does your JPS say?
And when you ask yourself, why have these things befallen me?
Oh, let me stop you here. So in Hebrew, we have 4 ways of saying you. What are the 4 ways? I'm putting you on the spot.
No,
She studied Hebrew at Old Pond last year.
Atata.
Wait, no, go on. Atata.
Atata. My brain is not going there. Atim.
There you go.
Okay.
So we have.
Atim.
So we have 4 different yous, because there's masculine and feminine, singular and plural. So there's masculine singular, feminine singular, masculine plural, feminine plural. Now, why is that important? Because there aren't a whole lot of passages in the Tanakh that are in the feminine you. Usually when someone's addressed, they're addressed as you masculine. Here, it's when you, and it's feminine, because the context here, earlier in the passage, is the Queen of Israel, which might be a metaphor for Jerusalem, but literally it's the Queen of Israel.
Okay.
Or the Queen of Judah, I suppose.
And when you ask yourself, why have these things befallen me? It is because of your great iniquity, that your skirts are lifted up and your limbs exposed.
Oh, your limbs exposed. So that's the euphemism. That's not what it says in the Hebrew. It says let's see. The King James has, thy skirts discovered and thy heels made bare. So there it's heels, which it is in the Hebrew. So literally what it says is your heels were Hamas. And heels in the Hebrew is a euphemism, because it wasn't her heels that were Hamas.
Right.
It was her, I'm going to use a euphemism too. Well, maybe not. It was her genitals that were Hamas. She was raped. Here, Hamas means raped, literally raped, meaning that's what it means. So when it says your heels were Hamas, the image there is, she's bent or laid down on her back, and her heels are sticking up in the air, and the man is coming and raping her. And Hamas here means they were raped. But it says your heels were raped because it doesn't want to say your genitals are raped, even for the Tanakh, that's too explicit. But think about this. The King James added another, and the JPS too, they both added another level of euphemism, right? So the JPS has your limbs exposed, and the King James has thy heels made bare, right? NIV has, and your body mistreated, right? So mistreated is a better translation of Hamas, right? So really it's violence were done against your heels, meaning you were raped, right? Which kind of violence, right? He wasn't, hitting your heels, right?
Well, here in the NRSV it says, "And you are violated."
Right. So that's a euphemism too. She was raped.
Of course.
Right. So how do we know that? Because the first half of the verse is your skirt was laid bare, right? So, I hate to be he lifted up her skirt, he pushed her down, lifted up her skirt, and she wasn't wearing 4 layers, and he raped her, right? So Hamas here literally means rape. So should we be surprised at what happened on October 7th? They call themselves Hamas, and it wasn't that there was a rogue terrorist who raped a Jewish woman.
That's true. That's right.
There were terrorists who were captured by Israel, and in the interrogation, they said, that guy, we had a group, we had a team, and there was one member of the team whose job it was to operate the maps, another member who was to operate, the drone, and another member whose job it was to rape. And they were told what kind of people to rape and how many to rape. Yeah. So they were given orders in advance, you're part of the rape squad, right? That was a strategy of war, or a tactic, maybe you could say, of war.
Terror.
Yeah, it was 100% to strike terror in the heart of Israelis, and it was very effective, quite frankly. It was evil, but it was definitely effective. It traumatized the entire Jewish people, and probably beyond the Jewish people, in a way that, I don't know, I haven't seen since 9/11. Okay, so Hamas means violence, rape, kidnapping. That's one definition. There's another definition of Hamas, which is to wrong ethically, and part of that is to humiliate. We see that in Job 19:7. I'll read that, but you look for Genesis 16 while I'm going there, because that's an important one. So Job 19:7, it says, "Hen etzak Hamas v'lo e'aneh, ashava'ah ve'en mishpat." He says, he says, "Behold, I call out Hamas, none answers. I scream and there is no justice." So the parallel here is I call out, I scream. What does he call out? Hamas! There's Hamas happening. And he says there's no justice. So Hamas here is injustice. Right, that's what the parallel tells you. And it's not necessarily violence. It's some ethical wrong has been carried out against Job, right? That's what he's talking about here. Genesis 16:5.
"And Sarah said to Abram, 'The wrong done me is your fault.'"
Well, give us the background.
So Sarah didn't have children, and she said to Abraham, "Hey, look, God has kept me from having children. Why don't you take my maid and sleep with her, and I can have a son through her?"
What could possibly go wrong?
And that's what happened. He cohabitated with Hagar.
Ooh, an euphemism, cohabitated.
I am going to use euphemisms. And she conceived, and when she saw that she was pregnant, she looked down upon her mistress.
She's like, "Oh, I have a child and you don't. Ha ha."
No. So Sarah said to Abraham, "The wrong done me, it's your fault." But that's not the word. What does it say in Hebrew?
It says the Hamas, it says, "My Hamas is upon you."
Yeah.
Meaning the Hamas that was done to me is upon you. And here it's not violence. There's no violence at all.
No.
So my Hamas is upon you. I gave you my maidservant in your bosom, and she saw that she was pregnant, and I was humiliated or belittled, really. I was made light in her eyes. May Yehovah judge between me and between you. What a powerful statement.
That really is a powerful statement. I think that we should call that out just as a way. Guys, when somebody does you wrong.
Look, there have been situations where I've heard you say this, and I know I've said it myself, where I'm burning with anger, and I take a deep breath, and I say, "May Yehovah judge between me and that person." I'm turning it over to Yehovah.
Right.
Let go, let God, as they say in the modern terms.
And when someone does Hamas to you, sometimes the only thing you can do is say, "May Yehovah judge between me and this person.
Right.
Because his judgment is true. We know from the Word of God.
Right. So she says, my Hamas is upon you. The Hamas that was done to me is upon you. It's you're responsible for it. And the parallel there is I was belittled in her eyes, or literally I was made light in her eyes. Right? So it's I was humiliated.
Humiliated, yeah.
Right. She doesn't actually say I was humiliated.
Right.
She says she despised me, right? I was made light in her eyes. But the result is I felt humiliation. And to be humiliated, that's Hamas. Which is, you can see how you get from that to rape or vice versa, right? That rape isn't about sex. Rape is about humiliating someone
And violence.
and violating them.
Yeah,
and violence.
it's about violence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Hamas also means to violate the Torah. And an example of that is Ezekiel 22:26. I'll read that one. You open up Zephaniah 3:4. Remember, Zephaniah is just after Habakkuk. I don't know how to hear it.
Do you want to get it, or do you want to read the one you're supposed to read?
Okay, all right. Ezekiel 22:26. It says, her priests have Hamas my Torah and desecrated my holy things. To Hamas the Torah is to violate the Torah. And I didn't know until we did this study that there's another nuance that I missed for years when I read this verse. For decades I read this verse. And I didn't know there's a nuance that I missed. I won't share what that is until the
Read
end.
it again.
Her priests have Hamas my Torah.
Okay.
And I think your JPS will say they violated,
Yeah.
Her priests have violated my teaching, they have, right? Which is they have Hamas my Torah, it says. Chamsu Torati. They have done Hamas against my Torah and desecrated my holy things. So it means to violate the Torah. But why not just say violate? There is a word for violate the Torah. We'll get to that later, because I didn't know until we did this study. They did not distinguish between holy and unholy, and they did not make known the differences between unclean and clean. They hid their eyes from my Sabbath, and I was made unholy in their midst. Does that sound like anything we're familiar with? I don't know. I can't put my finger on it. People who hide their eyes from Shabbat and don't distinguish between holy and unholy, clean and I don't know what that could be. Anyway, let's go on. But that is to Hamas the Torah. Okay. I'm going to control myself. Zephaniah 3:4. What do you have in your translation?
Her prophets are reckless, faithless fellows. Her priests profane what is holy. They give perverse rulings.
Which is really strange, because it's almost the exact same phrase as in Ezekiel 22:26. Chamsu Torah. They have Hamas the Torah. Right? So it should have been translated here based on the JPS as they violated Torah. In both cases, Ezekiel 22:26 and Zephaniah 3:4, who's doing it? Kohanim, priests.
Oh.
And they're violating Torah. Oh. So why would it say they give perverse rulings? And the answer is that this is a different, even though they're both JPS, it's two different translators. And the other translator either didn't understand it or understood it differently. I would say he understood it wrongly, but that's my opinion and I'm right. He obviously had a different opinion. But what he was thinking is, okay, Kohanim give out rulings, which can be called Torah, and Chamsu Torah is they get, and Hamas is corruption, perversion. So they gave out perverse Torahs. They gave out perverse rulings, right? That's his thought process. And that's fine, okay, it's possible. But in both cases, you have Kohanim who are Hamasing the Torah. That means they're violating the Torah, not their own Torah, but the Torah. So anyway, so that I think it's interesting. Both are JPS, and it's two different translators. We did a very brief search to try to find out who was the translator of Zephaniah versus Ezekiel, and we were lazy and gave up. But if somebody can find it and leave it in the comments, that would be really interesting. Because I don't know. We must know the name or the people on the committee who translated, this is the 1985 JPS, Ezekiel versus Zephaniah.
Interesting.
Right? I mean, a little bit of research. It wasn't that important to us, so we gave up, right? But it should be, one should be able to find that out. Anyway, next definition of Hamas is a lie or deception. And that you could say is unethical behavior, but it's a very specific type of unethical behavior. And for example, Exodus 23:1 and Deuteronomy 19:6 and Psalm 35:11, those three verses have the phrase Ed Hamas, in Psalms it's plural, a Hamas witness or Hamas witnesses. Well, what's a Hamas witness? Is it a violent witness? No, he's not getting up in court and punching out the judge. That's not what it's saying. He's not humiliating the judge and you could say it's violence because he testifies against someone to be executed, and that person could be executed, and so that makes him a violent witness. That's what I thought at first, and then I kept doing more research, and I thought it wasn't probably the case. It's a false witness, a lying witness. How do I know? Micah 6:12. You're right there next to Micah's a couple foot. No, the other way.
I haven't gone anyway yet.
No,
Which way do you want me to go? I'm picking up my pen.
Yeah, that way. Oh, there it is. Micah 6:12.
Okay. Micah 6:12.
Yeah.
Whose rich men are full of lawlessness, and
the word is Hamas. They're full of Hamas.
Oh, full of Hamas, and whose inhabitants speak treachery with tongues of deceit in their mouth.
So here's what it says in Hebrew, or my translation of the Hebrew. Whose wealthy are full of Hamas, and whose inhabitants spoke falsehood, and their tongue of deceit is in their mouth. Right? So it's three different ways of saying they're liars and deceivers. They spoke falsehood, the tongue of deceit is in their mouth, and they're full of Hamas. So Hamas here, in this context of a Hamas witness, we see to be full of Hamas could be to speak falsehood or do falsehood, right? Well, we didn't see do yet. We're about to see that. Isaiah 53:9. Now, can you bring the NRSV? Because Christians traditionally say Isaiah 53:9 is about Jesus. The Jewish position, although there are multiple historical Jewish positions, the more common one today especially is that Isaiah 53 is collectively about Israel. There are Jews in the past who said it was about a specific person who either lived in the past. Some people said it was King Josiah, some it was Jeremiah. Anyway, some say it to be the future Messiah. Isaiah 53:9.
They made his grave with the wicked, and his tomb with the rich, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth.
He had done no Hamas, is what it says. And we can see here, there's no deceit in his mouth, is the parallel to not doing any Hamas. So Hamas is to do deception, is to be a liar and deceiver, right? So Jesus or Israel, whoever it is not not doing any Hamas, is not a liar. And he was killed even though he didn't do any Hamas. That's really interesting, because I've heard from the other side, Jesus was a Palestinian.
Really?
Yeah, even though there was no such thing as a Palestinian in the first century, but whatever. All right.
Jesus
maybe he was a Pakistani.
He was a settler.
He was a Jewish settler.
He was
but that's
a
different
Jewish.
study.
I know it's a different
All right.
study, but
Psalm 27:12. Oh, you're so close. It's just to your Psalms. Now 27:12. Sword drill.
I can find Psalms, I promise.
I believe you. It's the big one in the middle.
It is the big one in the middle.
27:12.
Psalms
And it might be a
big.
different verse number in the English. The JPS will have the Hebrew numbering.
Do not subject me to the will of my foes, nor false witnesses and unjust accusers have appeared against me.
All right, so here's what it says. Wow. Do not give my soul to my enemies, for they rose up against me. False witnesses who breathe out Hamas. And really, they blow out Hamas.
Well,
What are
that's
they
nothing
blowing out
like
Hamas? They're testifying falsely. They're liars. So Hamas actually means violence, unethical behavior, rape, kidnapping, pillage, but also lying. It means to spew out Hamas from your mouth is to lie.
So Nehemia, one of the things when we've covered these, as we've walked through, one of the things I noticed is some of the verses that talk about robbery, they talk about the pillaging. We haven't pulled any of those up. The plunder. Are we going to do that?
We said there were 6 verses that talk about that.
Okay.
And we kind of were lazy and told people to look it up themselves.
Violence. We've got lying. We've got to do ethically wrong. We've got to violate the Torah, rape, pillage, plunder, humiliate, kidnap.
And to speak, did you say falsehood?
Lies.
Right.
Falsehood. Okay.
Okay. So there's a bunch of verses that talk about being saved from Hamas. And one of those is 2 Samuel 22:3. He says, God, the God of my rock in whom I will find refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my fortress and the place of my fleeing, my Savior, save me from Hamas. That's what he says. That's his David. And this is also in Psalm, well, the 2 Samuel 22 is in Psalm 18. This specific phrase is not in Psalm 18, interestingly. But then it's repeated in 2 Samuel 22:49, which is in Psalm 18:49, where he says, save me from the man of Hamas. Ish Hamasim, a man of Hamases. Right, it's plural there, but it's an abstract concept. From a man of violence and deception and rape and pillaging. Save me from that man, from the man of Hamas. Psalm 72:12-14. Go to Psalm 140 while I'm reading this. Psalm 72:12-14. He says there, Mitochu michamas yigal nafsham, which means something like, may their souls be redeemed from deception and Hamas. Right? So it's asking for redemption from salvation, from protection from Hamas. Hamas both as violence in some verses and here as deception. Psalm 142, can you read verses 2-5?
140, 2-5. Rescue me, O Yehovah, from evil men. Save me from, is this Hamas? Save me from the
Yes.
lawless. Save me from Hamas, whose minds are full of evil schemes, who plot war every day. That sounds a lot like what Genesis says about, that sounds a lot like what we just read about Noah, in the day of Noah.
Oh, that the world was, yeah.
Yeah.
People were full of evil all day long, their thoughts, their devices, their plans. Yeah.
They sharpen their tongues like serpents. Spiders' poison is on their lips. O Yehovah, keep me out of the clutches of the wicked. Save me from Hamas, from lawless men, who scheme to make me fall.
Can I throw something out here which is completely spontaneous here because we didn't talk about this before, but I noticed in verses 2 and 5 has the same phrase.
Yeah.
Me ish chamasim tinsereni, which is literally it's guard me from a man of Hamas or of Hamas's, from a Hamas person is really what it means. I'm just thinking out loud here. It's interesting that the word for guard me, the normal word for guard me appears at the beginning of verse 5. It's shamar, shomreni. But in this phrase, it's a different word. It's natsar. Natsar. So
Nun.
Nun sadi resh. It's the same root as the word Nazareth or Nazarene. So you could, if you wanted to, you guys out there, I'm not going to translate it this way, but if you wanted to, I guess you could translate this, Nazarene me from a man of Hamas.
Wow.
Just a thought, I don't know. Forget I said anything. Okay, move on. Just move on really quickly. Move along, sir, move along.
You're a lot deeper. You're a lot deeper than most of us, I'm just saying. So there you go.
All right. Okay, so there's a bunch of verses. Habakkuk 1:2, I call out Hamas and you do not save. Maybe we should read that. Habakkuk in the first chapter has the word Hamas a number of times, and we've brought a bunch of different verses in different contexts. Maybe read, the first number of verses of Habakkuk. How many times have you guys heard, a serious question to put an answer in the notes, how many sermons have you heard in synagogue or church on Habakkuk?
Not a lot.
No, I mean, maybe they have. Let's ask.
Maybe.
Yeah.
If you have, put it in the comments. I'm interested.
Or if you haven't put it in the comments,
mean-
I'm genuinely interested.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Well, and it's a small book, maybe, and there's other books that maybe are more interesting to most people. But, so yeah, it's an interesting question. So it appears 5 times between verses 1 through, it's verses 2, 3, and 9, I think all of which we quoted so far. And then it's in 2, 8, and 17. So let's read 1 through 9, or 2 through 9, just because it's a beautiful
2,
prayer.
8? Okay,
2,
2,
9.
8, and 17 you said. Okay, I
what did I
see.
say?
Yeah, we should do those two because they're good. How long, O Yehovah, shall I cry out and you not listen? Shall I shout to you Hamas.
Say shout to you.
Shout to you.
No, I'm supposed to say that.
Oh.
Y'all in the audience, say shout to you. So he cries out. So literally this is, I cry out, Hamas, and you do not save.
Why do you make me see iniquity? Why do you look upon wrong? Raiding and violence are before me.
Raiding and violence, that's shod v'chamas. That word showed that we said that pillaging, they're translating there as raiding. That's not wrong. Yeah.
Strife continues and contention goes on. That is why decisions fail and justice never emerges, for the villain hedges in the just man. Therefore, judgment emerges deformed.
Keep reading.
Look among the nations, observe well, and be utterly astounded, for a work is being wrought in your days, which you would not believe if it were told. For lo, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that fierce, impetuous nation, who cross the earth's wide spaces to seize homes not their own. They are terrible, dreadful. They make their own laws and rules. Their horses are swifter than leopards and fleeter than wolves of the steppe. Their steeds gallop, their steeds come flying from afar, like vultures rushing toward food. They all come bent on rapine. The thrust of their van is forward.
For Hamas, is what it says.
They amass captives like sand. We still have 100 and how many?
130 something. I don't remember the exact number. So what is this? So here's why you haven't heard a sermon in church about Habakkuk, because he's describing the Babylonian invasion that happened in 586 BCE. And a lot of people today say, I don't care about the Babylonian invasion of 586 BCE. What? Right? That happened in ancient history, right? He says, I'm raising up the Chaldeans who are going to come and kidnap people. And they did. They took the Jews captives to Babylonia. And they were captives there for 70 years. And they raped and they pillaged and they burned. They burned the temple. They took slaves, right? They're not just taking captives to relocate people to the east. They're taking people as slaves and they're killing them and they're raping them, right? Sex slaves in many cases. Well, we finished defining the word Hamas based on what
the Bible says.
What we see in the Tanakh. And if we had nothing but the Tanakh, this is the conclusion we would come to. In part 2, we're actually going to see information that comparative Semitic linguistics helps us see another facet that we might not have seen, and apparently nobody else saw, without looking at the broader cultural context of ancient Hebrew. And then we're going to see an actual prophecy that mentions Hamas in part 2. Can we end with a prayer?
Yeah, we can do that.
Yehovah, Father in heaven, I pray for Naama Levi. I pray, Father, that you be with her in her captivity and she be set free soon. Father, protect her. And Father, protect all the women around the world who are being Hamased. All the women around the world who are being Hamased by evil foreign aggressors or being Hamased by people who are supposed to protect them and love them. Father, I ask that you be with your people Israel and that you protect your holy city Jerusalem and that you protect all the people who call upon your name, who love you. Father, protect the people who don't even know your name, who have stretched out their hands to a foreign God, wanting to pray to you and not knowing your name. Father, protect those people and be with them when they call out Hamas, asking for your salvation. Please save them.
Amen.
You have been listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemia Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemia's McCore Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiaswall.com.